we are very, very happy to be here with Zimbabwe Open University and the wonderful hosting that we've had so far. It's really a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Madam Vice Chancellor. It's wonderful. So it's a little bit sad, actually, that it's the last consultation, because these have been so interesting, absolutely interesting. And we are producing a report for every country for the mapping study. So at the end of the mapping study, we'll have a report from every single country in SADC, which shows the knowledge capacity that we have in the SADC region for dealing with climate change related issues. And I think as the day unfolds, we'll be able to see that these are not small issues, they're quite huge issues that are really very, very challenging for us, not only now, but also into the future and also for the future generations. Those of you that have small children or grandchildren, I think, we're thinking a lot about these young people as we try to do the work that we're doing here together. So my job now is I'm going to have to do what they call a leapfrog. And there's a lot of discussion about leapfrogging when it comes to how we should think about development today. We have to leapfrog all the mistakes that have been made in the past. But I'm going to leapfrog over the first session, which Botha was going to introduce, and he'll come back to some of the detail when the minister arrives. So I'm going to try to see if the technology will allow me to move around. Yes. Just so that I can get to the computer. And then I'm just going to rush across the introductory part, and as I mentioned, Botha will come back to it. And it's also, if you do want more detail on it in the meantime, the little brochure that we've given you carries a lot of the detail of the actual initiative, which is this initiative that we call Climate Change Counts, and it is a SARUA initiative. SARUA, as you know, is the Southern African Regional Universities Association. It is, I think, the premier association which brings our Southern African universities together, and we do have the chair of SARUA. SARUA's board is also the Vice Chancellor of the Open University of Zimbabwe's Zimbabwe Open University. So it's a very prestigious and very important organization for the Southern African region. So the fact that our Vice Chancellors and our university leaders are bringing this topic to our attention, to the attention of the region, is, I think, a very important starting point for the whole initiative. Tomorrow's program will go into more detail on who exactly is doing what in our universities and also in our stakeholder organizations. And this is really, really important information for the mapping study, because what we're trying to achieve with this mapping study is to get a very detailed understanding of who is doing what in all of our universities across the SADC region in relation to this particular area. And I must say, I was very excited when I was listening to the introductions to hear that we have the faculties of social science here, faculties of education, faculties of arts, along with the ones that are traditionally working more with climate change, which is agriculture faculties, science faculties, environmental science faculties, climatology units, and so on. So all of these disciplines are extremely important for climate-compatible development. So it's very, very exciting that we have such a good range of disciplines here at this particular meeting. And we need the views and the perspectives of all of these disciplines. And you'll be so interested to see what has come out of the other countries when it comes to, for example, when the social scientists start to talk about climate-compatible development. It's sometimes quite different to the way that the agricultural scientists would talk about climate-compatible development, and we need all of those views. So tomorrow morning we want to try to get the detail of who's doing what, and also what you think needs to be done. That's a very important other part of this project. We mentioned it's the first year of a 5-year program for SARUA, and what we need in the mapping study is to know what has been done, but also what needs to be done. So we have to have those discussions tomorrow. We'll also discuss this concept of knowledge co-production. How do we get stronger forms of knowledge co-production with all of our stakeholders, both inside and outside of the universities, and stronger relationships between them. So those are the things that we'll discuss tomorrow in tomorrow's program. So please, we'd like to see you both here today and tomorrow, if you will be able to. So this is just the background to SARUA. I won't go through it. Botha will talk to it a bit later. But I think just for very quick information, we're talking about 61 universities across the SADC region that are members of SARUA, that have been participating in this initiative. So it's quite a huge initiative for the region. and it is a 5-year program. This is the little graphic you'll find there. The mapping study is what we're focusing on in this phase, in the year 2013. The purpose is to work towards these knowledge networks and knowledge hubs, and also to strengthen our postgraduate capacity. That's where the whole initiative is going to. I won't spend time on that. Again, it's in that document. The detail of the mapping study, I think Bota will probably talk to that a little bit later, will you, Bota? And just in terms of what we're trying to achieve. But I think the name and mapping study probably says, you know, this is what we're trying to get, the detail of what is actually happening across the SADC region. And there's a number of questions that we've been working with, which we'll work through with you as well as we go through the workshop today. And then what we're supposed to produce is a regional framework for knowledge co-production that we can, you know, work with together across the Southern African region as we try to deal with this issue of climate-compatible development. And we'll be producing a policy briefs and so on, which Bota will also talk to. He'll also talk about HIMA, which is the institution that has been commissioned by the CDKN and Surua to do this mapping study, and he'll tell us a little bit about the HIMA and the HIMA approach, the big group of people that are working on this project. As you can imagine, it's quite challenging. We've had to work across 12 countries in 9 months, is it, Bota? So we've had to, you know, work quite sort of smartly and sharply, and we've been able to work with quite a wide network of people across the region from the different countries. So that's just, you know, what we'll come back to a little bit in more detail just now. And if I can now then try to focus a little bit on this first session called Framing Climate-Compatible Development. I don't know if I'm standing in the way. Am I standing in the way of the slides here for some of my colleagues? But I think I think for most of you will probably already have some, you know, insights into climate change and what is happening with climate change. I think we just had, is it last week or the week before, the new IPCC policy summary has just been released. The data is from a presentation by Francois Engelberg from the CSIR, and it was made in November 2011, and it has also been used in the new IPCC reporting. And the conclusion of this is that our projections on temperature are actually what they say, robust. In other words, we can rely on them. They're robust, and they are also actionable. And this, I think, is the important issue for us today. You know, as we see these climate statistics, as we read the reports, as we see what's being said, we need to be able to make decisions about what is robust and what is actionable. In other words, what can we certainly begin to act on, and, you know, begin to make the moves into the future. So this is, I think, is the important question. This is just two, what you call it, extracts from this modeling, which kind of shows this change in temperature over this long period of time. And this shows temperature anomalies in 2050, and you can see here the increase in temperatures is going up to 2, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 and 6 degrees is the highest one, and the levels of orange, you can see the sort of, you know, you come back to 2 to 3 degrees. That's in by 2050. That's not very long time from now, another 40 years from now, less than 40 years, 37 years from now. So we're looking, you know, at time periods that we can actually conceptualize in our imaginations. Okay, and this is the projection for 2100, and you can see there this sort of 4 to 6 degree temperature rise being very much situated in this middle part of the Southern African region, with Zimbabwe included. And some of the projections that are coming out of the Zimbabwean analyses are also showing this increased warming, and that this part of the SADC region is particularly vulnerable for the increased warming. And I'm sure those of you around the table that are involved in this kind of scientific work will be able to, you know, have better detailed insight into this. And we've also seen some of these statistics, I'm sure, coming from you into the regional, you know, country-based reporting, and then into the regional analyses and so on and so on. So we are, I think, you know, beginning to produce some fairly robust data and insight into what we are going to be looking at in terms of climate change just from the temperature perspective. I think most of you know that the temperature projections are more robust and they are the most reliable in terms of what we can look at in terms of projection, compared to, for example, the rainfall data is less robust, and we're not exactly sure what those patterns are going to be, so they're less certain. So we have this kind of a problem with climate information, is that some of it is more certain, some of it is less certain, but overall we have a good sense that there is something that we have to be looking at and we have to be working on. So for just a very brief kind of review at a more regional level, is that Southern Africa has been identified, I think, by the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, as one of the regions that are most vulnerable, or very vulnerable, highly vulnerable to climate change, due to the severity of the projected changes, the structural problems that we are still battling with, for example, poverty, I think we all know about those, and then also levels of adaptive capacity within our institutional frameworks. So, and then we also have current climate variability and vulnerability to extreme events such as floods and droughts is quite high, and I think this is one of the things that I see reported in the Zimbabwe data as well, in Zimbabwe reporting. Water availability, that's a very critical issue in my country, for example. Land degradation, loss of biodiversity and health threats, so it's very good that we have the health sciences faculties here as well. Constraints to food security, development and poverty eradication. I think these are some of the kind of general issues that we're looking at a regional level across the Southern African countries. And you can begin to see why it's important for an organization like SARUA to be taking a lead, because they are an institution partnering with SADC that can actually connect us across the different countries, because we're all dealing with these same kinds of vulnerabilities. They differ in certain ways in different countries, but there are many overlaps and many things that are quite similar. So we actually need this regional leadership and this regional collaboration in order to make the most of all of our capacity together as we go into the future. And I think this is what this initiative is very much trying to do. So climate change is going to have, as we know, exacerbate the impact, say for example, of loss of ecosystems, ecosystem services, which we know is already going on, loss of biodiversity and so on, water security and so on. And there is now, as I mentioned, more secure data on the temperature changes, and there is also an understanding that these temperature changes in our region, in Southern Africa, are in general going to be higher than the global average. So we're going to be warming more and faster than the rest of many other places in the world. So we have that additional challenge that we're going to need to really understand and come to terms with. And then just overall, the pattern is projected for overall drying in Southern Africa, with increased rainfall variability and also increased rainfall intensity in some parts, delayed onset and early cessation of the rainy season. So this, I think, is probably what the agricultural community here has got a very strong understanding of what the impact of that sort of projection is. It makes the whole agricultural industry highly uncertain, and the patterns of the past are no longer as clear as they used to be. So we need other kinds of ways of working with these issues. So I think there is this sort of general picture across the region, what our key risks are, how we're going to begin to deal with them is of course the big question. Zimbabwe doesn't have the problem of rising sea levels, which I think is a blessing, whereas our neighbors, Mozambique, my country, South Africa, Namibia, they do have the problem of rising sea levels, and many people are living in the coastal areas and the coastal cities, so they have other kinds of problems that they also need to deal with. I don't know if any of you have seen the most recent National Geographic. If you get a chance to look at it, it's an absolutely fascinating publication, because what they've done in that magazine is they've remapped the world. They've looked at if the Arctic ice melts, then sea level will rise on average by 126 meters, and they've remapped the world. They've looked at what the world will actually look like if that sea level actually rises. Massive implications for human migration, human development, and not just here, everywhere. So I think we're looking at a very challenging but also probably quite creative future where we're going to have to be thinking differently and doing things differently. Okay, so climate compatible development as a concept, I think Simbi introduced it to you very briefly earlier. She says it's something that brings everything together, and I think for that reason it's an interesting and a useful concept. It is part of sustainable development, and one of the things we've had in many of the workshops is people have said, well, is this different to or the same as sustainable development? We've been working with sustainable development, what's this now? You know how it goes when you bring words into the system. But climate compatible development is part of sustainable development. It is essentially low carbon, climate resilient development. Okay, and we can now spend a bit of time just now discussing what that actually means to us in our different subfields or subsectors. And it recognizes both the need for adaptation and mitigation. So for both, adaptation and mitigation is necessary. And of course this concept is very relevant to Southern Africa because we need to continue working on development. We can't stop development, but we need development which is actually going to be climate compatible and more sustainable. Okay, so, and what we've also been seeing is that climate compatible development is framed in many different ways, and the reason for that is that there are these contextual demands. So in a Southern African context, we cannot frame climate compatible development outside of a discussion of poverty alleviation, poverty, these kinds of questions that we do. And our specific vulnerabilities, which are not the same as they would be, say, for example, in Canada or in Latin America or elsewhere. So we have a very specific contextuality that we have to bring into these discussions. And what climate compatible development really requires, and this is quite interesting when you look at the policy landscape, is we're actually seeing this beginning to happen, the mainstreaming of these kinds of issues into all aspects of a country's development, into all aspects of a country's education and training system, into all aspects of whatever is going on in the nation state and at a regional level. So we're starting to see this mainstreaming going on in different contexts, and I think that the Sorua initiative is one that's going to bring to the fore what's going on in our universities so that our universities can perhaps develop a stronger response. Okay, and then essentially climate compatible development is actually about learning, because nobody really knows what we exactly have to do or how we're supposed to do it. Okay, we are going to have to work it out. We're going to have to work it out as we go along. And that's going to have to happen everywhere, not only here in Zimbabwe. It has to happen in South Africa, in Namibia, in Tanzania, in Malawi, everywhere. We're going to have to learn how to do this. Okay, and hence the universities being so important. Universities are the intellectual leaders, the academic homes of new thinking in our society. So we as academics, as professors in universities, have to really think hard about this. And it's quite challenging when you begin to think about it. So I think, for example, I'm in an education faculty, I think, now what is it that our education and training systems should look like if this is the future? Okay. And then if you think you might be in an agriculture faculty, what should our agricultural systems be like if this is the future? If you're in a health faculty, what are the health-related issues and what should the health education be like? What should social sciences look like? These are the questions that are so interesting, I think, for us. And for me, it feels quite sort of both scary but also creative. There's a space for new thinking, for innovation. So I think if we can think about it like that, it will be quite an exciting possibilities for us. So in terms of, just a summary of climate compatible development, it sort of brings together much of the discourse on adaptation, development, mitigation, discussions about co-benefits, between mitigation and adaptation, climate resilient development we've heard a lot about. Okay, so we want development, but it must be climate resilient. Okay, low carbon comes with the mitigation discussions. So it sort of brings all of these kinds of things a little bit together, and we can then start to talk with each other. So we don't have the adaptation camp there and the mitigation camp there and the development camp over there. We're now around the same table thinking about the future together with our mitigation work, adaptation work, development work, and so on. And that's really what I think this concept helps us to begin to do. So I thought we could have a little bit of a, maybe just a short little buzz group discussion, maybe some just reflections from you. What does climate compatible development mean to you, okay, in whichever sector or area you work in? If you're working in health or in education or sociology or geography, or what does climate compatible development mean to you in this country, okay, in Zimbabwe, in Southern Africa? So maybe just a couple of minutes to maybe have a little discussion with the person next to you. Just sort of think about, what does it mean to us? What does this concept mean to us? Are you happy to just buzz with each other? It would be a